Hi there. So I'm Meredith Lehman. I'm here with some folks, and I have no idea who usually introduces this.
Excellent. And I'm Kai Larson. I usually introduce things. So welcome, Neha, welcome, Ricky, and welcome, Meredith, to another episode of Business Analytics on the Blockchain. So
yeah, I'm very excited to be here.
And we are pleased to have you with us, Meredith, as a budding expert on DAOs. Right?
Yes, thank you. We'll see how we feel about that descriptor by the end of this conversation. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here and to talk about DAOs and how they fit into the sort of blockchain ecosystem and what some potential directions DAOs are taking, because I think they're an emerging organizational form that has a lot to potentially offer and a lot of potential challenges we could discuss and unpack as well. So yeah, really happy to be here.
What is DAO, Meredith?
That's a great first question, and it's one I've answered a lot lately as I talk about my research interests. So a DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, but generally speaking, that's just any kind of on-chain or blockchain-enabled organization. Generally, it's any sort of group of people whose procedures are enabled by blockchain protocols and smart contracts. So when you think about any kind of organization, let's think about a startup, for instance. If you are trying to start a business and thinking about how you want to go about it, you might say, I'm really interested in a decentralized model for this. I really want there to not be one central leader. I want everybody to work together. I want the members of my organization to be able to vote on what we do and how we make decisions and how we run our business. You might use a DAO as a model. And so if you're doing that, you would build all sorts of rules into the system from day one using blockchain protocols. And so then they were transparent. Everybody can see what those rules are. Everybody can see what's going to happen in the voting process.
Okay, very nice. So basically what I'm hearing from you is that every major issue gets voted on. So does everyone get one vote, or what's going on here?
You would think that would be a simple question. It's definitely not a simple question in DAOs. So there are a couple different models for this. One of the most common models would be that the way that you establish yourself as a member of a DAO, as a community member, is by buying tokens. A lot of DAOs have their own native token. So I would buy the token of that DAO. Let's say I start Kai DAO, right? Because I'm a big fan of Kai Larson. So I start Kai DAO and I have my Kai token. So I buy 10 Kai, right? And so now I have 10 votes in Kai DAO. And then other people buy tokens, right? So maybe Ricky buys 100 Kai because he's really bullish on this DAO, right? So Ricky has 100 votes in Kai. So you can pretty quickly see I have a certain amount of power to vote in the DAO. Ricky has a certain amount of power to vote in the DAO. Ricky has more power than me. He spent more money on those tokens. He has more Kai. So you could do a straightforward one token, one vote model. And that's probably the most common and the most easily explained. But a lot of DAOs are recognizing that that comes with its own problems. Kai, if you were to guess, what would be some problems with that model?
I would guess that my friend Elon might have more potential power than me, first of all. Is that true?
That's true. If Elon wants to get into Kai DAO, he can buy, 100,000 Kai immediately and have all the power, right? So Elon's a whale potentially in this environment. And, depending on how you feel about Elon's decision-making, you might not love that idea. So that's a big problem with the one token, one vote model. It becomes a plutocracy or something where the more wealthy people have more power pretty quickly.
Okay.
So a lot of DAOs have recognized that. They're going for other models. You can try a one person, one vote model. That is also really challenging. Any thoughts on what the challenges are of trying to limit it to one person or one wallet, one vote?
Ricky, I bet you have some thoughts on that.
Symbol resistance.
Yeah, Sybil resistance. You want to explain what that is? You know it better than I do.
So essentially, you want to be able to prevent something that you would call a Sybil attack, which is essentially one person impersonating many wallets. And it can be really challenging to actually make sure that one person equals one wallet. And there's a lot of kind of innovation that's happening in this area around like biometric verification. But as you can imagine, people are kind of very wary of something that scans your retina and like puts it on chain, right?
Right. When you have a community that so highly values privacy in many cases, the idea of vector verification can be really tricky. Some people want to get rid of tokens for voting altogether.
Okay. Any other problems with this? This sounds a little less enticing as we go on, but I'm sure there are solutions. But are there more problems you see, or?
There are probably some other problems. Unfortunately, Kai, I would love to convince you that this is a great form, but I guess we have to get the problems out of the way first. One of the biggest problems in the US, at least, is regulatory environment and regulatory uncertainty.
Okay. One more simple question. Who gets to decide what's being voted on?
So the way that votes come about so you've got your sort of fundamental protocol that you're built on. Any kind of changes to that protocol come about through proposals, generally from members. It's a very decentralized process. In most cases, anybody within the DAO can submit a proposal, an improvement proposal. So in Kai DAO, that might be called a KIP, a Kai improvement proposal, right? So I, as an enthusiastic member, might submit a KIP, and then everybody can vote on it, would be the most typical way. The proposals themselves are very decentralized.
And what Meredith described is basically how the graph itself actually works. So the way she mentioned you would have KIPs, we actually have GIPs, so graph improvement proposals. And as Meredith said, like anyone in the community can surface something or make a post or propose a change, and then it basically works its way up until it eventually gets to kind of the implementation phase.
Absolutely.
So Meredith, you are a PhD student in organizational behavior, is that right?
Correct, yes.
So how do you see this differing from the traditional models of an organization? And how will traditional organizations adopt this approach?
So what DAOs are most similar to traditionally that's existed for a long time would be like a cooperative model. So we have lots of co-ops that exist. It's a pretty small minority of organizations, but we see successful co-ops. So I think if you're an organization that's already really interested in empowerment and autonomy of your workers and really thinking about decentralizing decision-making power, which a lot of organizations are, as the expectations that people have about work are shifting.
What's your favorite DAO and why?
Well, I don't want to be too partial. There are DAOs that I think are really interesting, and then there are DAOs that I think have a lot of potential long-term, and those don't always intersect. I think one that is both. I really like Gitcoin. That's a pretty big player in the sort of grants and public goods space. So if I were betting on the future of DAOs, I really like what they could do in nonprofit and public goods oriented spaces. And I think Gitcoin is a really good example of that. So Gitcoin funds public goods, especially like Web3 blockchain oriented public goods. So if you think about all different tools we have to navigate the Web3 world and blockchain, a lot of those tools are for profit at the moment, but you can imagine a world in which people are incentivized to develop better tools and then make them open source so that anybody can use them for free. And that's essentially Gitcoin's sort of main mission, is to gather grants collectively from other interested folks. They do a lot of funding drives for these kinds of projects. And then the outcome is really cool tools that can be sort of publicly used and shared.
Okay. So can I ask you, Meredith, can you name a group outside of the blockchain ecosystem that has benefited from the existence of a DAO?
That is a good question.
As a person who's like interested in things like craft beer, right? There are a couple of brewery DAOs that I have followed along with a little bit that I could say, actually, I want to run this as a DAO. I want collective involvement. I mean, beer is a great thing to do collaboratively, right? You can think about ingredients and different experimentation. You can think about what people want to drink and try. So beer is a good use case for DAOs in the sort of brick and mortar real world that I hope to see take off someday.
You had me at beer, Meredith. Nice. Ricky, come up with a brilliant question for Meredith.
Well, so out of like the benefits that we covered earlier, is there any one particular benefit that like really speaks to you, that you really value and find really important? For me, for instance, I think one of the things that really speaks to me is how incentives work differently under the DAO paradigm versus a very stakeholder-centric view of the world.
I think for me, one of the most compelling reasons to think that this could be a good long-term solution for certain types of organizations is this idea of autonomy and buy-in from all individual members. And that's still a challenge for DAOs when we think about voting. One of the biggest struggles that a lot of DAOs mention is, we put up all these big issues for votes, and maybe we get 10 or 15% of people actually voting on it. Those are low voting numbers, even by like United States voting metrics, right? So apathy and voter engagement is a real question, but I think at its best, this idea that you have a community of people who can be genuinely empowered to make decisions that impact their work life is really exciting and is an appealing counter model to the usual sort of top-down organizational structure.
Totally, yeah. And on that note, as a follow-up, how would the experience as an employee at a normal organization versus like a DAO, what would that experience be like as an employee?
Yeah. And well, first of all, I wouldn't use the term employee probably, but for legal reasons, right? In the United States, most DAO workers are not employees, they are contract labor, which has some implications, right? It means you don't get usually any kind of healthcare or other benefits. So you have to figure out a way to fill that gap. So that's one big one. Among the subset of DAO workers who do this as a full-time, I would say the ways that it differs from a traditional organization, a lot of it has to do with communication, and things like feedback and compensation practices can be really different, and really different from DAO to DAO too.
Nice. How do you see the path between where you are right now and your first paper being published in the Academy of Management journal?
So right now, I'm at a mostly qualitative data gathering stage, doing a lot of interviews. So if anybody watching this says, oh, I'm in a DAO or I'm a contributor to a DAO and I'd love to talk to Meredith, please reach out to me. That would be great. So we look to the data and we say, okay, what is happening in this ecosystem? And that's where organizations that are doing such a good job of pulling and making data accessible, and the graph has been involved in a lot of this. So we could say, I'm really curious about the question of engagement and motivation at an individual level, and then we could find ways to test those hypotheses in the data. So look at voter engagement numbers, for instance, who is voting, who is putting forth proposals, what percentage of people like repetition.
That's a really great segue actually into our next video, which is going to be about doing analytics on DAOs using on-chain data, leveraging subgraphs that were built on the graph by the team at Messari, who's been doing an incredible job at standardizing subgraphs and making them super accessible for really cool analytics. So yeah, the next video will be really cool, diving more into the analytics use cases. And Meredith, you mentioned people can contact you and if they want to participate in your research. Could you maybe plug whatever best way people can reach you at?
Yeah, absolutely.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Meredith. We need to do more of these things.
Yeah, this was really fun.
That was amazing. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Meredith.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome.